All right, welcome back. This should be our final session in this mini-series we've been doing called The Antichrist, the biblical overview, key understandings, and some interesting possibilities. We may continue to develop some other themes later on as we go in, or add back into this later on as I feel led by the Spirit, but I'd like to get back to Revelation when our next live cycle starts. And as a reminder to everybody, next week we will not be live. We will have church service, but it'll be our Circle Sunday local congregation time of fellowship and prayer and question answering, testimonies, all that kind of stuff. So we won't be live for our online audience, and so that'll be the week of August the 30th. And then August the 6th is Labor Day weekend, and September the 6th is August. You know the thing. Who do I sound like? My gosh. I don't know. All I know is we got to beat Ronald Reagan in November. I need a second. Just hold on. September the 6th is Labor Day weekend, so we will have no service that week. We prefer to take those 3-day weekends and have everybody spend it with their families. It's northern Michigan. Summer is short enough as it is, so we will just have no service Sunday, September the 6th, and we will meet back here the following week, September the 13th, with the beginning of our new live cycle, and my hope is to jump back in to the book of Revelation at that time. So that's what's going on. That's what's coming up. With that said, let's jump back in and give you 2 full weeks to review. Let's review just a few basics. I got some ground I want to cover in this one, but I think it necessary to kind of re-put some of these principles in everybody's mind. Remember, we operate on 2 discoveries that are some of our most basic concepts about God's Word. And one of those is that the Bible consists of 66 separate books penned by over 40 authors over a period of nearly 2,000 years. Yet they are an integrated message system. That cannot be said from any other book from antiquity. It cannot be said for any other religious book. Doesn't matter where you come from. It's not the Quran. It's not true of the Apocrypha. It's not true of any other religious book. Only the Bible can say that about itself and prove it. Thus, the second discovery is that it can be demonstrated that the origin of this message, the message contained within the Bible, originates from outside our dimension of space-time. And why do we say that? We say that because the Bible is remarkably accurate at doing something that nothing else can, and that is predicting history in advance. It is a prophetic book in its very nature, and that makes it unique. It has been demonstrated true. The Old Testament is the account of one nation. The New Testament is the account of one man. The Creator became man, and His appearance is the central event of all history. He died to purchase us and is alive now. Our purpose on this planet is to know and to honor Him. Some of our presuppositions have been that our God means what He says and says what He means. The Bible is an integrated whole, so every detail is there by design. When Jesus says not one jot and not one tittle will disappear, He literally means not the dotting of the I or the crossing of a T will go unfulfilled when it comes to His word. Every detail is there for a reason. Nothing is trivial. And according to places like Romans 15:4, all things are there for our learning. So even these weird things in the Old Testament that we've been studying, they are there for our edification and to grow from. That is essential. We have been operating on the basis that we've had to go back to go forward. And in this session, we're finally going to go forward. We're going to dip back for just a little bit into Daniel chapter 11, but we're going to wrap this session out by taking a look at Revelation chapter 13. This will not be our comprehensive commentary on that. That'll come later, but I want you to be familiar because I want you to see the payoff. Remember, everything we've been talking about from a prophetic standpoint is like a three-act screenplay, like your favorite Hollywood blockbuster, wherein in the first act, the very diligent screenwriter puts in setups. And in the last act, he pays those setups off. And I gave examples to you. Examples like Pirates of the Caribbean, when Will chucks that sword in the first story and blocks Captain Jack from exiting that door. The sword is so embedded in the wood, he can't lift the wooden brace that's blocking the door. Will is excellent at throwing a sword. At the end, when Jack is about to hang, the gallows drop. Will throws his sword, and Jack can land and stand on that sword embedded in the supports of the gallows. We believe it because it was set up for us in advance by the storyteller. If that had happened with no setup whatsoever, we'd all go, yeah, right. But we have a tendency to buy it because it was set up for us in advance. That, in a nutshell, is Hebrew prophecy. It follows a pattern. It is set up and payoff. And it's time to start looking at some payoffs. We've been looking at this character of the one called the Antichrist. We said that the first type of him that we have really is the character of Nimrod. I encourage you all to invest in Alexander Hislop's The Two Babylons. You can get it on audiobook. It is still incredibly dense. It's not going to be a James Patterson 2.5 page turner. I promise you that. But it is worth the study in your own time to familiarize yourself with the evolution of the Babylonian religion. We covered this to some degree in our series on the seven churches. And by that I mean we saw that the beliefs in the religious system that were created in Babylon, specifically the deification of Nimrod and his mother, a lady by the name of Semiramis, they became the god Tammuz, and Semiramis became Baal and Astarte. Nimrod goes on later to become Heracles in Greek mythology. Some of you would refer to him by his Roman name, Hercules. On and on, we begin to see the personification. Isis and Osiris and Hoth in Egyptian mythology. We see that when Babylon gets captured, that religious system of that day moves to a new capital called Pergamus in Asia Minor, the western portion of Turkey. And then Rome comes along and conquers Pergamus, and that religious system moves and takes up residence in Rome. Well, then you've got a pagan religious system that has been around for millennia hanging out in Rome. But you also have the head of the empire there. And in 312 AD, we get to a guy called Constantine. And Christians have been in a horrible place for 250 years because it was illegal to be a Christian in the Roman Empire. And they would do absolutely horrible things like dip them in pitch, tie them to branches, and set them on fire to light the gladiatorial games. That happened under many Roman emperors. But Constantine comes down the pipe and he says, no, it's legal to be a Christian in the empire. And then his successor says, not only is it legal to be a Christian in the empire, I declare that everybody in the empire is a Christian. And that was the worst thing that could have ever happened to Christianity. It was the worst thing that could have ever happened because pagan temples became Christian churches and pagan priests became Christian pastors with no conversion to Jesus Christ whatsoever. And what happened is the Roman mysteries, the Babylonian mystery religion became converted into Christianity. And if you do your study, that's where we get a Christmas tree, a Yule log, an Easter bunny. All of those pagan traditions get overlapped into what was a Christian belief system, and we celebrate them as though they are Christian today when they are not. Interesting stuff. Fun to dive into. But for now, we've tracked our way through history. We've looked at 4 different empires, and the place where we left off was with Alexander the Great. Daniel chapter 8 spoke of Alexander the Great as conquering the Medo-Persian Empire as a he-goat with a notable horn that came in and just decimated everything. And then when that notable horn was uprooted, 4 horns came up in its place. That, of course, historically speaks to the rise of Alexander's successors, Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. And then as we jump into chapter 11 of Daniel, just to look at it a bit, I want to remind you of this guy, the little horn, Antiochus Epiphanes, a prototype of this character we see as the Antichrist. And we know he's a prototype. We know he's a echo in advance of this person, this future world dictator, this future world leader that will persecute the saints prior to Jesus coming back, because Jesus says so in Matthew 24. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation as foretold by the prophet Daniel, he's the one telling us to look back at Daniel to see an archetype, a prototype, a pattern of things that are yet to come. And we're going to pay that off in this session this morning. So that's where we've been. Let's talk about these things called the silent years for a moment. Daniel chapter 11 covers a period in time between the close of the book of Malachi, aka the last book of the Old Testament, and the opening of the book of Matthew. Okay? And a lot of scholars call those the silent years because it's a 400-year period of history that God was not speaking through prophets currently during that time. So they call it silent. So they think that the Bible doesn't cover that historical period. The truth is it does. It just did it hundreds of years in advance in Daniel chapter 11. Now, for many of us, we think the division between our Old and New Testaments is that single page after Malachi closes that says the New Testament. But where does Jesus say the Old Testament ends? Can anybody tell me? With John the Baptist, because Jesus says, for until John, the prophets spoke. For until John. In other words, Jesus declares that John was the last of the Old Testament prophets. So with the passing of John the Baptist, we entered into a new covenant, a new Testament era. It actually takes place during the Gospels. Just something worth noticing. Let's talk about these 2 kingdoms, the Ptolemies versus the Seleucids, and the battle between the kings that we see in Daniel chapter 11. So the Ptolemies are going to be referenced as the kings of the south. And the Seleucids, they're going to be referenced as the kings of the north. And you can kind of see that if we go back to the map that we were looking at just a minute ago. The Ptolemies are south as far as Israel is concerned, because everything biblically is centered around Israel. And the Seleucids are north. Now, a lot of people say, why is God so obsessed with Israel? Do you know that to this day, if you're going to look at languages, text, that all languages, English, French, Spanish, etc., all languages west of Jerusalem read from left to right. All languages east of Jerusalem, Chinese, Japanese, Vietnamese, they read from right to left. Do you really think that's a coincidence? Do you know that at this moment in time, there are more foreign news correspondents for cable and broadcast TV networks based in Jerusalem than anywhere else on the planet? Why is this one city on the planet the focus of more attention in this world than anywhere else? What sense does that make if what the Bible says about Jerusalem, that it will be a cup of trembling, that what happens in Jerusalem will make the rest of the entire world nervous? How can the Bible get that right? What sense does that make? Why wouldn't it be New York City or London or Beijing? No, it's Jerusalem. If the Bible's not 100% true, how is that true in our world? How does the Bible get that right hundreds of years ago? So the kings of the south and the kings of the north. In verse 5 of Daniel 11, it'll be dealing with Ptolemy I, and you can see the dates that he lived. Verse 6 will deal with Ptolemy II, known as Philadelphus. Verse 7 through 8, Ptolemy III. Verse 11 through 12, Ptolemy Philopator. Verse 17, Ptolemy V, Epiphanes. Verse 25, Ptolemy VI, Philometor. Now, that's the history, and those dates are there. And again, don't worry, these are all going to be in the video, in the comments. We place all of the pictures of these slides, so you can go back, blow them up real big, and look at them on your own. Then you've got the kings of the north mentioned in verse 5, Seleucus I, Nictator, Antiochus I, Soter, Antiochus II, Seleucus II, Antiochus III, the guy known as Antiochus the Great. Then you have Seleucus IV in verse 20, and you have Antiochus the fourth, Epiphanes, right there at the end. Now, we're not going to go all the way through Daniel chapter 11. We're actually going to pick it up after all of that. So on your own time, study Daniel chapter 11, verse 5 through about 35, and you can see the tale that the Bible tells of those silent years and the history in advance that were taking place there. We are going to pick it up in Daniel 11, verse 36. So up until this point in Daniel 11, we've seen those silent years between Matthew and Malachi play out in advance prophetically, but now in verse 36, the focus changes. It says, "Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god." Now again, this is after Antiochus Epiphanes has come on the scene in verse 35. Antiochus Epiphanes being a type and a shadow of that little horn that one's to come. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods. Here we see in his character again, his big mouth is getting him into trouble. And shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for what has been determined shall be done. This is talking about this happening in a period of time where God's wrath is being poured out. But for a host of scriptures, we know that God's wrath hasn't been poured out yet, because Jesus, when he was reading in the synagogue from the Isaiah scroll, he said, this was the day of comfort, this was the day of peace, this was the day of liberation. And he stops quoting from Isaiah when it comes to the day of the judgment and vengeance of our God. Jesus didn't say that it happened yet. He left that to be yet future. Verse 37 through 38, he says, "He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. But in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses, and a God which his fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver and precious stones and pleasant things." Now, this is very interesting, and I can't go into it with too much detail today, but as I've been studying the mythology, that queen of heaven that Jeremiah references, the mother of Nimrod, that woman called Semiramis, who later becomes Astarte, Ashtoreth, Venus. She also becomes personified in a deity called Cybele. And Cybele we pictured on one of the 7 letters to the 7 churches. If you recall, she was crowned, and her crown was a crown of buildings. She was the goddess of fortresses. So here already we see a play at a return to the most ancient pagan religion of all time. This man will honor the God of fortresses. Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge, and advance its glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. At that time, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him. Okay, so now we've transported ourselves to the time of the end. We've tracked all of this history, but it's like we come to a place where there's this unspoken interval that doesn't get recorded. And interestingly enough, and we've gone over this and over this at different places, go back to our 2 sessions that we did on the rapture. God deals with Israel. All of these prophecies are concerning Israel and the church as though they are mutually exclusive. I usually give you the image on the screen of a chess clock. When the time for the church starts, the time for Israel is paused. When the time for Israel begins, the church is paused. Well, where does the church go? We cover that in our 2-part series or a 3-part series on the rapture. There's a reason that the church is removed. The time of the end is a reference to the day of the Lord. The time of the end is a reference to that time of Jacob's trouble. And the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. Now these 2 southern kings are attacking one king that was that was different than all the others and is worshiping a different god. They warred back and forth for the whole first part of this chapter, but now they're attacking this one king that's a threat to them both. And they'll attack with chariots and horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land. What did we say the glorious land was? That's Israel. And many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand. A lot of people think that this world dictator isn't going to have any opposition whatsoever. They think he's going to conquer everything. He's going to conquer a lot, but God is saying right here, these shall escape from his hand. Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. And if you study that out biblically, interestingly enough, and you want to make a note in your prophetic studies for this, that seems to be the area that is today known as the country of Jordan. It's also incredibly interesting that Revelation 12 depicts Christians fleeing from this guy and hiding in a place that can be biblically described as the geographic region today known as Jordan. For some reason, the saints in that time will be able to flee to a place where this character won't have access to. We don't know why. For some reason, this king can't touch it. Then he shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. All of these nations that have one time or another troubled Israel, they're coming into subjection to this one world dictator. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with a great fury to destroy and annihilate many. Who are those that are in the east? Who are those that are in the north that come against him? And he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas. What does between the seas mean if Israel's in the middle of it? The Mediterranean Sea is on the coast of Tel Aviv. What's the other sea? It's the Dead Sea. So where is he going to plant his palace? Sounds like Jerusalem to me. Between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. So here we see this conflict between 2 seeds that we've been talking about since we began this little mini-series. It's the very same forces that are behind the world powers today. As we go into Revelation, you're going to be introduced to the red dragon. He first appears in Revelation 12, and we are told exactly who he is. He is called the serpent of old, And in case you didn't draw that back to Genesis 3, God spells it out for you a little clearer. He says, the devil, because he knows we're dumb. Then he says the world leader. We will see in Revelation 13, because in Revelation 13, we see two beasts arise. One comes up from the land, and we can call him the land beast. This is the Antichrist. This is the coming world leader. This is Mr. Big Mouth. You'll see him in a moment. And then we have a beast that arises from the sea that we call the false prophet. He's empowered by the beast, who is empowered by the dragon. We're going to see what we could call, in effect here, a demonic trinity. Because Satan can't create anything. All he can do is pervert what God has done. So let's look for a moment at Revelation 13 to give you an overview of what we've been building to in this little mini-series. We're again going to see animals and beasts. On your screen is a depiction of the character that is described here, and you can already begin to tell there are great similarities to that fourth beast that troubled Daniel so much a couple of sessions ago when we were looking at it in Daniel 7. We are now on the cusp of payoffs. So Revelation chapter 13, verse 1, it says, Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast, title of the Antichrist, rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns. And on his heads a blasphemous name. So John stood, he actually saw this. He is there. And the word beast here in the Greek is therion. And this is important because earlier on we saw living creatures that some translations call a beast. But this word therion, this means fearsome. This means ugly. This doesn't mean beautiful in any sense. In fact, it's a beast of prey. And then we sometimes have questions, is this a Gentile? Because of verses like Revelation 17:15 and Isaiah 57:20, because it's coming not from Israel, it's coming from the sea. And it has 7 heads and 10 diadems. And earlier in Revelation, we saw things like the crown of life. Those were Stephanos crowns, like the wreaths that they used to get at the Olympics in ancient times. That was a crown for a victor. These crowns in the Greek are diadems, meaning they're the crowns of someone who has the right to rule. It's a different term that's describing this beast. John goes on to describe him. He says, Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon, which we learned about in Revelation 12, one chapter before this, who is the serpent, who is the devil. So the devil gave him his power, gave him his throne, and great authority. You say, well, how does the devil get the right to give anybody a throne? Go read Matthew 4 and Luke 4. Jesus is facing the temptations in the wilderness, and the devil says to Jesus, Look, all the kingdoms of the world, behold, these have been given to me, and I give them to whoever I want. Just bow down before me, and you can have them. And Jesus says, of course, I worship nobody but my God in heaven, Father God. He stands in our place. Now, interestingly enough, if you study that out, if you study the biblical concept of dominion out, like we do in our series Legends of the Fall, Jesus took back that dominion at his accomplishment on the cross. The devil technically has no right to do this anymore. So when the devil gives this guy his power, his throne, his authority, he rules for a prophesied, predetermined period of time, but then what happens? The one with the true power, the one with the true authority, the one with the true throne shows up and says, You're done. I am here to take back what is legally mine. And how do we know that it's a legal transaction? Because when we study Revelation, we're going to go back to Jeremiah, and we're going to look at an obscure prophecy in Jeremiah where God tells Jeremiah to go and to buy a piece of property, and that piece of property is bought with a deed contract, a scroll, and that scroll is sealed, and Jeremiah is told to put it away. We get to Revelation, and Jesus in the throne room. Oh, guys, this is what's coming. And I start to get excited. When we get back, when we do Revelation 4, 5, and 6, hold on to your butts. This is some of the most exciting stuff in the entire Bible, because everything that Jesus is doing is he is unlocking what is called the seven sealed scroll. John has a moment in Revelation when he sees this scroll. Oh, I get chills. I swear to God. He sees this scroll and his heart falls out from him because he sees no one who is worthy to unlock it. But then comes one like the Son of Man. Jesus shows up on the scene and he is the rightful heir, and he starts unlocking the scrolls. In those seven scrolls in Jeremiah that start unleashing all of these judgments of God, that is not something that we as believers in Jesus Christ should be afraid of. That is the power of God taking back what he lawfully acquired at the cross all those years ago. And today he starts unlocking one and then the next and then the next. That is the description of the process of Jesus taking back the authority from this guy. Isn't that a beautiful thing? That should make you incredibly excited to go through the rest of the book of chapter 4 to chapter 22 of Revelation. I get chills when I think about it. So you'll notice that this beast is like a leopard, has the feet of a bear and the mouth of a lion. He is the same first three beasts from Daniel 7, but it's described in reversed order, because in Daniel 7, it goes lion, bear, leopard. The payoffs are starting to happen. Some scholars look at it this way. They say the lion communicates arrogantly, the bear controls extensively, and the leopard conquers swiftly. The same first three beasts all summed up within the fourth beast. Revelation 13:3 says, "And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound," remember when we described in Zechariah 11 in the last chapter, this wound to his head and to his right eye and his wound to his right arm? We are now seeing this same character wounded, but in a future sense. And it says, "And his wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast." Why do they marvel? Because this isn't some flesh wound. This is something that practically kills him, mortally wounds him, probably makes him, in fact, look dead, maybe even possibly be dead, and he comes back. And that is something that freaks out the whole world. They all marvel at it, and they say, this is the guy we're going to follow. Does that not sound like a perversion of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ? Remember, Antichrist doesn't mean the opposite of Christ. The word in the Greek, pseudo-Christ, it means in place of. He comes claiming to be a Savior. Again, here's that verse. "Woe to the idle shepherd that leaveth the flock. The sworn sword shall be upon his arm, and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean, dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened." Was this guy a Jew that was not a Jew? Maybe. Was he a Gentile? Maybe. The Bible kind of keeps us guessing. It gives us hints, but it won't tell us everything. We see through a glass darkly. Revelation 13:4 says, "So they worshipped the dragon who gave authority to the beast." What ultimately happens because of this beast? The dragon is worshipped. And they worship the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" Do you see the questions that are being proposed at this moment? It almost harkens back to the people trying to scale the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. when God had to come down and to confuse their languages. Verses 5 through 6, it says, "And he was given a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies." There's that same type that we saw on the little horn, the pompous words, Mr. Big Mouth. And he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Wait a minute, this is the same time frame that we looked at 2 sessions ago. One of many references to a specific period of time that we saw in Daniel 7, the time of Jacob's trouble, a time unlike any other before or after on the earth. It's referenced as, in Daniel 7:25, time, times, and half a time. I talked about how that's in the Aramaic. It's referenced as in Daniel 11:2 as 42 months, and then in Revelation 12:6 as 42 months, 1,260 days. Any way you look at it, it's 3.5 years, and we see it again. And yet we've never seen that 3.5 year time period take place in the prototypical fulfillments of these prophecies. That's an aspect that has always seemed to remain yet future. It is the last half of that 70th week of Daniel, that 7-year period of time, that is technically called the Great Tribulation. It is a time talked about more than potentially of any other period of time in your Bible. It says, "Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven." Let's take a minute and think about that for a second. Is there a tabernacle where God is worshiped in Israel right now? No. Once again, that must come to pass before all of this starts to happen. Because this man is going to be like Antiochus Epiphanes, and he is going to desecrate that temple. We see another allusion to it. But look at this last allusion. "And those who dwell in heaven." Who's dwelling in heaven at this time? Us. The church has been removed. What better way to discourage people than to attack those who got taken out? You missed that ride, you better get on my train. Revelation 13:7-8, it says, "And it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them." And this is one of those places we looked at before where Jesus made a promise to Peter. He said, "Upon this revelation that I am the Christ, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against my church." And yet the saints that are on the earth at this hour, during this time, get power, or this big mouth is given power to overcome them. We're not supposed to be overcome. So who are these saints? These are people who put their faith in God after the church has been taken out. Many of them likely to be martyrs for the cause of Christ during this evil rule. It goes on and it says, "And authority was given him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him." Nothing like this has ever happened. "Whose names have not been written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world." If your name is not in the Lamb's book, you will worship this guy. "If anyone has an ear, let him hear." This is that same phrase that Jesus was saying to his churches in Revelation 2 and 3. He says, "He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed by the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints." They must endure this. And then he says, "I saw another beast coming out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, but spoke like a dragon." And he exercises all authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast. This is that character we call the false prophet, a religious leader in the cult of the beast, whose deadly wound was healed. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. These aren't parlor tricks. He apparently has the power to work miracles. You say, why would an enemy of God have the power to work miracles? Remember the sorcerers who turned their staffs into serpents after Moses turned his staff into serpents. There is power in spiritual forces. The problem is there is not truth in evil spiritual forces. It leads to a lie. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he was granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. Now they make an idol. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast. And the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Somehow he makes people die who won't worship him. Is that some form of biochemical warfare, targeted viruses, potential technological breakthroughs we're just beginning to pontificate could be possible? He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand and on their foreheads. And people who know nothing about biblical prophecy know Revelation 13:17, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Now, according to places like Exodus 13:9, it's always been a sin to take that kind of mark in the Torah. We see it again in Leviticus. You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor tattoo or any marks on you, for I am the I am the Lord. So, here is wisdom. Revelation 13 says, it says, let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Now, there's a lot of false interpretations. People are worried that getting ourselves chipped or all of these kind of things. Back in the 80s when I was a kid, in 90s at prophecy seminars, they all thought barcodes were going to be the mark of the beast. Pretty sure that didn't happen. See, the thing that we have to remember is it's not a number that marks our identity we have to be concerned with. It's a number that marks his identity. The mark of the beast is not your social security and a chip in your hand. Now, that might be bad for other reasons, privacy, tracking, all of those kind of things, but that's not necessarily the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast is something you are taking upon yourself that causes you to be identified with him. So don't freak out over the prophecy buffs saying that the COVID-19 vaccine is going to have a tracking chip in it. That's actually the mark of the beast, and you're going to go to hell if you take that vaccine. Don't take the vaccine because they rushed it to market. The Greek alphabet, you may not realize, is different than ours. We're almost done. It's an alphanumerical text. In other words, we have Arabic numerals, right? So we have our own characters for our numbers. The Greeks didn't. Their letters corresponded to a numerical value. And that is where we get this phrase that the mark of the beast is 666. We have the word for Christ, and if we take the first letter and the last letter and we put that little serpentine symbol, which is a Greek character, in there, a Greek character that's valued at 60, by the way, we add those three characters up and we get 666. And that is one way that that's listed out in that verse. Another way that it's listed out is 666 in the Greek, those three Greek words, hexakosioi, hexakanta, and hex. But a lot of people make a lot to do of this. And the reason they do this is these three characters, the key, the ski, and the stigma, they make those numbers. But again, I like to point out where prophecy buffs might have it wrong. Let's zero in on one manuscript. This is Codex Ephraemi Rescriptus. And it shows these characters different. You'll notice that middle character is not the middle character that makes 666. This papyrus, it's one of our oldest papyrus from any complete New Testament we have. It suggests something a little bit different. It suggests that the number might actually be 616, which scares the heck out of me because that means the Antichrist could actually come from Grand Rapids. So I just figured I'd put that out there for you. Terrifying. Maybe it's Rob Bell, who knows? And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his head. That is Revelation 2:3, describing that serpent. And then we see again this interesting phrase in Revelation 17:10. This is a hard one for some people to parse. It says there are also 7 kings, 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. The beast that was and is not is himself also the 8th and is of the 7th, and he is going to perdition. Now, what this is talking about is that 11th horn again. And it's making note to the pattern that we've been describing. There was, but now he is not, but he will be again. And so we have to learn our lesson that prophecy is pattern and that it's about setups and payoffs and that we need to go back before we can go forward. Those are the true keys. I think we'll leave it there. I have enough for maybe one more session. We'll see where we go. We can tap on a few of these other things next time. But what I really wanted to accomplish in this setting was show you at a glance that God has set forth a principle when it comes to prophecy in His Word that we can look back at the things He showed us before. We need to interpret it with precision because God was very accurate about the history that He was predicting, but He left hints, He left nuances, and when authorities like Jesus Himself or John receive it, where did the revelation come from? John saw Jesus, and then Jesus gives him the revelation at the end of the book, right? So that's still basically Jesus talking, even though it's in apocryphal or apocalyptic form. When Jesus is the one who is saying we have to look forward to look back, and there are aspects of this that have not yet happened, but yet we see the detail, in fact, the excruciating detail with which God went to the trouble of fulfilling it in the past. What makes you think He's not going to go to the same level of detail to fulfill the parts that are yet fulfilled? That's why we have a futurist interpretation of the book of Revelation. That's why we claim that this Antichrist isn't just a personification of evil. There is a yet future coming world dictator that will do these things, that will be given power over the saints. And we'll look at some of these other things later on. So let's close with prayer. Father, there is so much to unpack. And sometimes feeling that burden is overwhelming. Because I know that so many people get a roughshod shotgun approach to prophecy. They don't get a systematic line-by-line explanation of things. I know, Father, that for some people, they could be in church for 30 years and never have any of these passages of the Scripture even discussed, let alone explained to them, let alone tied into one another. And we just vow that in this church, God, we're not going to let any portion of Scripture be dark, because there are great promises for us when we unpack them. None of this should call us fear. Yes, like Daniel, it could trouble us. But unlike Daniel, we stand in the place of so many great and powerful promises that you've made to the church. What that should make us want to do, and I pray you would birth it in the heart of everybody within the sound of my voice, is to dig into the New Testament and uncover and write down and chronicle every promise to the church as New Testament believers that we get to claim. And then have it motivate us to share the good news of your gospel with as many people as we can, so as few people as possible have to live in a world where this guy has a throne and power and authority. Rather, God, we could go celebrate the marriage supper of the Lamb with you and return to watch you kick him off his throne. And the people of God said, well, we love you. The offering plate is in the back. Please be cheerful givers. And we will see you in, we'll see you September 13th for our next live session. Go with God. I'm going to let Michelle shut it down, and we'll take questions before we dismiss. All right. Anybody got any questions before we call it?